I currently worked with a school that just went through renewal. They did really good on paper. They got their renewal. The authorizer said, hey, you're doing really great. But what I loved about what this school's doing and this board is they're reflecting. They're taking that step back and said, yes, we got a renewal. That's great. We met expectations. But let's really revisit our promise to parents and students.
You're listening to the Bold by Choice podcast with Vashanta Harris and Jim Gunner. Real talk about charter schools, from the boardroom to the classroom. Powered by the National Charter Schools Institute.
Well, welcome, friends, back to the Bold by Choice podcast, where we explore what it takes to create schools of excellence, from vision to renewal and everything in between. I'm Vashanta Harris.
And I'm Jim Gunner. Today, we're diving into one of the most critical decisions in a charter school's life, renewal. The moment when a school must demonstrate that it's earned the right to continue. Across the country, only about 25% of charter schools have closed since the beginning of the movement, and not all of them because of failure. Some turned in their charters, while others were not renewed. But in every case, renewal or closure is a signal to the community, the parents, the educators, and most of all, to the students.
Renewal is a moment that can feel a little bit like Judgment Day for some schools and really a celebration for others. So if you've never heard this term before, here's what it means in the world of charter schools. So every charter school operates under a performance contract. So think of that as that legal agreement with an authorizer that really spells out what the school is promising to deliver. That could include academic outcomes, so how well are students going to do in terms of their report cards every year. That can include financial stewardship. So how well is the school using the finances that they have and the taxpayers' dollars to make sure that students have what they need every day? It could also mean operations. How well is the business aspect run in the school? But these contracts don't last forever. They typically have specific terms that could be 3, 5, or even 10 years. So when that specific term time comes up, the schools go what we call a renewal process. So they are asking to continue to be able to be a school and to operate and serve students. Oftentimes, this process is a very deep review to determine whether the school has met its promises and whether it should be allowed to continue to operate. So think of it like a job performance review, but for the whole school.
That's right, Vashanta. And I've been around chartering long enough to know that renewal shouldn't just be a process. It should be a check-in on the promise. When a charter school is approved, it makes a bold promise to its students and families. We'll deliver something better, something meaningful, something worthy of your trust. That promise is written into a charter contract, but it lives in the day-to-day work of classrooms, boardrooms, and community partnerships. Renewal is the moment we ask, how are we doing on keeping that promise? I often say that authorizers and boards are more than overseers. They're guardians of opportunity and stewards of possibility. Their job isn't just to enforce rules, it's to protect the public's trust, ensure students are well served, and support the schools in getting better. So in this episode, we're pulling back the curtain on what renewal really means, not just for compliance, but for community. Because when we get renewal right, we don't just evaluate schools, we elevate them.
So we have two of our colleagues who have actually been on the show with us before, Mary Bradley and Heather Windling. Welcome, Mary and Heather, back to the show.
Yeah, Vashanta and Jim, it's great to be here. And this is a great topic to discuss and talk about. It's very relevant across the charter sector, whether it's you're an authorizer, a board, or a school. So this is one of the heart of charter schools.
Mary, I like to say that there's no charter school in America that hasn't gotten a charter and doesn't get it renewed.
That's right. Well, why don't we start here? Mary, I'm going to come to you first. When you hear the word renewal, what really comes to mind for you?
Yeah, for me, renewal is a decision point. It's when a school and authorizer look at everything, the past, the present, the future, and has the school earned the right to keep going? It's a check-in on performance. And I think it's also that reflection of what's possible. And so one thing that, I've come to really appreciate is that renewal is both a decision and a moment of reflection. So reflecting back, but then also reflecting on things like the mission and how are we doing. So it's really that formal determination, but it can be so much more. And that's what we're seeing more and more schools take advantage of, and authorizers is that really that time of reflection. And it reminds me of like using my GPS. I use my GPS all the time on road trips, on long road trips. And when you hit that unexpected traffic jam, or there's construction ahead or an accident, the GPS doesn't say, oh, sorry, go home. It really says, hey, let's recalculate the route for you, very calmly. And so renewals really like that. It's where are we going, and whether the route still makes sense. Has something changed? Are there different conditions? And really, what should we be paying attention to and adjust? I currently worked with a school that just went through renewal. And they did really good on paper. They got their renewal. The authorizer said, "Hey, you're doing really great. Here's a couple of areas you need to work on." But what I loved about what this school's doing and this board is they're reflecting. They're taking that step back and said, "Yes, we got a renewal. That's great. We met expectations." But let's really revisit our promise to parents and students. Let's revisit what we said we were going to do, and where can we even take our mission further? What did we say we're going to do? What does our mission say? And let's really set our expectations much higher than anything a renewal will do. And so that's really what's neat about the renewal process, is it's not just looking back, it's also looking forward and recalibrating for students and families.
I really love that. And Mary, you've had such rich experience both as an authorizer and then in the support work that you've been doing with schools here at the National Charter Schools Institute. And Heather, you have some similarly really robust experience. I even recall, like, when you and I were both independent contractors, we'd be on some projects together. And I know we both spent a lot of time in that kind of external evaluator space. So I'd love to ask the same question to you with your experience. When you hear renewal, what does that really bring to mind for you?
Yeah, early in my career as an authorizer, I spent almost 4 out of 5 days a week in schools doing on-site evaluation. A lot of them were at renewal time or in the years leading up to it. And what I still recall very vividly is that every visit for every school felt so different. For some schools, the whole renewal process, from the paper application to the visit to the board meeting to the public hearing, it all was just like a victory lap, right? No stress at all. For others, every piece of it created such extreme anxiety that you could feel in every conversation you had with anyone at the school, sometimes even stress for the students themselves. So I wondered then, and I think, over the years since, even in supporting other authorizers, I've always paid attention to what are authorizers doing, or what are they not doing, consciously or subconsciously, that creates that crazy wide spectrum of experience. So because I think what we hope and feel is that renewal should feel like a natural continuation of their day to day, not a surprise, not something you have to prepare for, or sort of perform for. But in the schools that were really stressed, you could feel it as soon as you walk through the doors. That this was this incredibly high stakes moment that would make or break them, rather than just another opportunity to tell their story over time, over that full charter term. So I think that's a really important piece of it. And if I was trying to use a metaphor to describe this, I would say too many schools think of renewal as a yearbook photo, right? One day, a snapshot, you have to dress up for it, you have to look perfect. But real renewal should be more like a documentary that captures the messiness, the obstacles overcome, the evolution. It doesn't have to look perfect. It's actually best if they're honest about that journey, because what's more impressive than a school that has overcome challenges and, still doing great things for kids?
I love that one. And especially if you have nephews like mine, you dress them all up for that yearbook photo, but you might get any sort of facial expressions when the
Yeah.
picture comes back. So I really love
Mm-hmm.
that, right? It's that
Yeah.
snapshot, and that one day may be great, may not be. It's about the full story of how the school's
Yeah.
doing.
One more thing I think I would add to that as well is, thinking back to where, as an authorizer, I felt we were really optimizing renewal as a process to drive improvement. Even when we were visiting and evaluating our super high performing schools, it wasn't just like checking the boxes like, okay, you did this and this and we can be complacent and we're going to move on. Then the question sort of shifted a bit to say like, what's next? Where are you pushing? Where are you growing? What are your kids and families telling you that they need on top of the program you're already providing, right? That there's never a ceiling for what schools can achieve.
Heather and Mary, we talk about at Bold by Choice taking the mystery out of renewal. How are you seeing renewal evolve over the years? And is it becoming more clear, less stressful, or what are you seeing out in the field?
I would say in most places, yes. I think early on, and even with some authorizers that are still, sort of newer, putting process and policy in place and things like that, it often felt in some places that they got through the new application process, and that's, rigorous and robust, and they kind of thought they were done. Right. They thought that was the hard work. As long as you approved strong folks and good teams, then that was the hardest part of the journey or the life cycle of authorizing. Some of them were trying to fly the plane as they were building it and just figuring stuff out as they went. Nowadays, I think more generally, we see folks that have robust performance frameworks, clear metrics, ways for the authorizer and the schools themselves to just take a look at the goals and do their own assessment and measurement about where they're performing, how far or near are they to the authorizer's vision of success. So now it's not just are we keeping them open? It's very much more oriented to do they meet the goals they set out to achieve? How well are they doing what they promised? So one cool inclusion too, we're seeing more and more, is the addition of mission-specific goals into a lot of schools' accountability plans. For example, if a school, proposed to open a French immersion school, they enroll students under that programming, families are excited, the community knows that this is what's going to be, built and operated. It makes sense to measure, are those students actually becoming fluent in reading and speaking French? As the purpose of the school. So insisting on that kind of alignment really matters. Like checking if the ingredients on the box actually match what's in the meal. And families chose those schools based on those promises. So it's something definitely worth following up on. Another thing that I can't say how quickly this has caught on, but seeing a lot more consideration of authorizers around automatic renewal for schools with strong results. So that would make renewal less of a heavy lift for schools that are just consistently high performing, they're thriving, they're showing continuous improvement. The process can be smoother and less burdensome for them. Also really benefits the authorizers because then they can focus their attentions and their time and their resources on the schools that are maybe have a more inconsistent or mixed record of performance. It's kind of like TSA pre-check for high performing schools. So I think that is something that has a lot of promise, especially because it's very few authorizers have really sufficient staff to execute all the processes they would like to.
Yes, I agree with Heather. Whether, differentiation, whether it's automatic renewal or just streamlining the renewal process for those schools, particularly that are knocking it out of the park every year and consistently meeting expectations. So we're seeing more and more authorizers rethink. And then also like streamlining the process for all schools. Authorizers collect things all year long. And what we were seeing before is that they would request those same documents and same pieces of information and data again. And so we're seeing authorizers streamline that more for schools and all schools, which I think is really helpful. And so we're seeing it more as a check-in. So what that entails is authorizers being very clear about how schools are performing throughout the term of the contract. Like every year, the school leader knows, the board knows, there's no surprises when it gets to renewal. And I think that's really key. And that helps everybody, is particularly, schools can then have the information and boards, the correct information of how they're doing against authorizer expectations. And we also see schools and boards be more proactive, like Heather said, of, tracking how are we doing, monitoring how they're doing against authorizer expectations. And then I'd also say the other change that we've seen a lot is who's at the table during renewal. So typically it was the authorizer in the school having conversations and looking at data and looking at documents. And now we see more and more authorizers going into the school with qualitative reviews, which I think is great. It's one thing to see something on paper, another thing to go see it in person. And then also we see stakeholders like the key stakeholders, the most important students and families involved. And so I know when I was in Chicago Public Schools, we'd go do our, formal visit for renewal, but we'd also have focus groups, have those conversations with different students, different parents, even teachers, is get their perspective of what the school is like for them. Ask them those questions. And they were really honest. Like sometimes there were students that would just say, hey, there's issues here. And that was a really interesting moment. And they would talk that through and be very honest. Where other times it was so great to hear those personal stories of what's really going well at the school and those great celebrations of the students and the parents. So I would say we see more and more differentiation, no surprises renewal, and also getting the voice of the students and the families and the community as part of the renewal process.
And one thing that I personally have found interesting is we are out in the field, we're working with our partners, even at conferences. There's been what I feel like is a spike in conversation about how can we improve this process for that same group of folks, the students, the families, the teachers. And I think it's making authorizers take the time to reflect and say, are my processes really considering what's most important? Am I asking for the documents or the data that really matters? And so one of the things I wanted to ask both of you as you've gone through your careers, what should be the most important considerations to review a charter school for renewal? And Heather, I'd like to come to you first on that.
I think I'm going to refer back to the car analogy that we started with at the top of this conversation. It's like checking a car before you take a long trip. So you want to make sure that there are certain things that are in good order so you don't want to get stuck. So I think in this scenario, first is academic performance. Is the school getting kids to where they need to go, especially given where they started, right? Context matters. Secondly, financial health. So is the fuel tank full and the budget reliable? Lastly, governance and leadership. Are the people steering the wheel capable and aligned? But more than that, we also need to ask, is the school paying attention to and asking and listening to its passengers? So as Mary was saying, there is a trend to being more inclusive and doing focus groups and talking to kids and talking to families, but using that information to make informed decisions about programming or about, whatever families really are asking for. Huge indicator of quality, especially in a choice environment.
I love that analogy, Heather. And I just add one more layer to that. Renewal isn't just about checking the car. It's about pulling over at a key checkpoint. So when you pull over on a long trip, you think about, okay, I've come this far. You may check the car, kick the tires, look under the hood, and decide like what's needed for this next part of the journey. And so for me, it's both a snapshot of current performance, but also a planning tool for the future. Like I said, I've seen the most effective renewals happen when, this is how we're doing, but what are the challenges, like you stated earlier, that have had to be overcome? What do they anticipate? Because the landscape changes. Funding may change, or something may change leadership wise at a school, or they anticipate leadership changing. They may have something with facilities that is upcoming that, the authorizer in the schools can have conversations about that. And I always tell schools, like, don't shy away from being honest. Have these conversations, bring up those challenges so like we can like think through those together. And I always like to know as an authorizer, like what's coming. I don't want to be surprised either. And so I think to have like a smooth ride going forward on that journey is to make sure that communication and that those checkpoints are happening, I think is really a key thing. And then also not ignoring the voices of the most important people along for the ride, and that's students and families and even teachers. We've had a lot of conversations with schools about, teachers. It's hard to get great talent and keep talent. And so even understanding from that's the heart of a school, is that learning aspect of it. And so from leadership to teaching, special populations, any safety issues in the neighborhood, we used to talk about that a lot because we weren't just the oversight body. As a district authorizer, we were also that support arm. So really understanding those challenges and how we can support was really big for me. And also schools appreciated that. And so I really encourage authorizers to have that bigger conversation. Let's just not talk about what's going well and, this is where you're not meeting expectations. Let's talk about the challenges to overcome in the future, and then also those great things that you have planned as a school. And schools shouldn't shy away from sharing those things. And I think that open dialogue really helps everybody to prepare what's to come next. And so I think renewal is an exciting time. I think schools should embrace it. I think, authorizers should embrace it as not only a reflection point of what's past, but let's get excited about what's coming in the future.
Mary, I love how you framed that. And when you think about two key moments, right? One is applying for a charter and getting it approved. Really, you're getting asked all these questions that are hypothetical because you don't exist as a school yet. You don't have students. You don't have teachers, right? You don't know what your culture is. You don't know where your students come in on a performance standpoint. But at Renewal, you do, right? All of that's in place. You've got some data. So to not just talk about the past, but talk about the future, now what's possible. And we love that idea of authorizers being stewards of possibility. But let's make this a little sticky for a minute. Let's say I've got a 5-year charter. My first 2 years, things are rocking. Third year, things kind of transition, and years 4 and 5 aren't so good. Well, how do you think about that as an authorizer? There's a lot of professional judgment that has to go into something like that, isn't there?
Absolutely. And I think one of the most important part of authorizing is renewal time. Having difficult conversations or having those reflection moments with schools. When I talk to authorizers, I say, hey, let's talk about trend data. Look at trajectory. Understand if are things getting worse? Are they holding steady? Are they starting to improve? And then have that conversation with the school. So sometimes like a decrease in performance could be a blip, and that school can have a really good conversation with their authorizer about why and what they're doing to overcome that. And so I think trajectory and trend data is really important. And then I think also digging well below that surface level metrics. Test scores tell you something. Yes, they're important, but to really understand that context of leadership and culture and everything else that happens with a school, running a school is tough and things happen. And sometimes it's in the control of the leader and the board, and sometimes it's not. And so really understanding what's happening, what's the challenges, what's your goals to overcome that, and what does that look like is really important.
I totally agree with that. And I think in an ideal world, authorizers and schools would both just welcome renewal as a turning point, a moment where you can pause and recalibrate if necessary, even if it's to just think bigger, right? Do we want to replicate? Do we want to expand, right? I think all of those decisions and all of those discussions should be happening as schools go through renewal. I remember over the years working with quite a few schools, that had struggled in the way Jim was describing, right? Just some uneven performance, stuff happens, maybe some declining academic performance, issues with student attrition. But in that, year and a half before they were going to go through the renewal process, they buckled down and they brought in new leadership. They, adopted some new instructional programs, and they set a good course for themselves with, goals and timelines, and they held themselves accountable to demonstrate progress so that they knew they'd be in a better position in the eyes of their authorizer and in the public, to earn more time. So in cases like that, I think that's a success story because they used a renewal not just as a process they had to go through under statute, not just as a decision point for their authorizer, but they used it as a springboard internally for themselves. And that's that in that instance, renewal can be so powerful because it's not just about accountability. It's not just, about meeting the bare minimum to get another couple of years of operation, but it's really about improvement so that schools can shine a light and codify what's really working, name what needs to change, and then figure out what the conditions are and the clarity they need to move forward. But that only happens in scenarios or in situations and contexts where authorizers have made renewal predictable, collaborative, and also just looking at the future to know what's possible, not just always judging schools on what happened in the past.
These are really inspiring reflections. And as I think about it, even in the context of one state and beyond that across the country, renewal isn't necessarily a standardized process. So we have some authorizers that have these kind of well-oiled machines, if you will. The expectations are clear, school leaders know about it, they get trained on it, the tools are shared out 4 and 5 years in advance. There's consistent communication, like all the pieces of the puzzle of transparency. Others, there may be variations right in between. And so renewal can sometimes, according to some school leaders I've talked to, feel inconsistent, maybe even feel confusing to that group of folks in particular, the school leaders and sometimes the board members that serve the school. And so, much like the schools that they govern, authorizers are in this state of like constantly learning, right? We are always learning new tricks and trades to make our work stronger. Authorizers are also which I think is awesome, very often evolving, right? I have a friend that says every time you add one new person to a team, it's a brand new team. And so we think about that happens in authorizing offices as well. And I think one thing that's why we here at the National Charter Schools Institute offer opportunities like professional development, coaching, consulting, so we can really support and help authorizers as they think about what their new renewal processes and practices are, identify those areas for growth, and even co-design strong and transparent processes and tools that can align with their values. So with that in mind, for folks who want to improve their renewal work or even just get an evaluation of it, where would you recommend they start? And Heather, I'm going to come to you first.
Always have to start with clarity, right? Clear is kind. Authorizers should ask themselves what matters most amongst all of this information, to inform our renewal decisions. And have we communicated those priorities clearly and consistently over time? Especially as you said, stuff changes and stuff evolves. So if there's anything that is shifting, authorizers need to share that with schools as soon as possible, and also explain why. Right. So as educators and instructional leaders, they appreciate the context as well. Right. And that diffuses that sense of the goalposts are always moving and this feels like a gotcha and it doesn't feel like a sound, authentic process. So if schools feel like they're guessing what their authorizer is looking for, that is a signal, right, to the authorizer to be like, we need to do some reflection as well to better define our priorities, communicate them early and often. And that's not just in the year before renewal or during that process. Do it well before then, if possible. And I think for authorizers to really improve their renewal work, it gets back to seeing it as an opportunity for capacity building, not just, compliance and checking boxes. When authorizers give schools meaningful feedback, and that could be over the course of the charter term, based on student performance or, enrollment, things like that, or when they're on site and they're doing qualitative, collection in classrooms, talking to folks, that kind of cognitive coaching supports improvement. And it also just shifts the tone and can really impact the relationship between authorizer and school leader from one of judgment or, to growth, which is really where change is going to happen. So that's the kind of relationship that helps schools get better. And then ultimately the kids benefit from that.
Yeah, I would agree. And I also would say, renewal it should be a more proactive than reactive process, right? And so when I was an authorizer, and the one thing we always did right away after a renewal process or new schools or whatever that is that we were doing, that event, we did a debrief right after the process ended to capture what we felt went well and what we needed to improve on. And so that we didn't forget those things. We also asked schools what worked well for them and what could we do better next time. And that really helped us to, refine our processes. So it worked well for us and it worked well for schools. And I think that's a really important piece of this, is to have that dialogue even within your team and your schools of like, hey, how can we make this better? I tell schools and boards, be proactive. you know renewal is going to happen. It happens, like clockwork. You know when it's going to come up. Be proactive. If you have another 3 years or even 5 years to renewal, celebrate those successes, but talk about those challenges and how you're going to show up, across the board. Another thing is I always tell schools and boards, don't show up when there's a big crisis. Don't just show up when you have your hand out and you need something or want something. Show up all the time. Share good news. Share good news with your authorizer. Share good news with your parents and your families, your community. Be an advocate out there for your school. And so by sharing that good news consistently, it puts your school in a much better position. And also, as an authorizer, I love to hear good news. Our authorizing board love to hear good news. Too often people come with problems and not also those times to celebrate. So I think getting those relationships built in a very consistent way, not just at renewal time, but consistently every year throughout the charter term is really important. So I would say both from the authorizer, be proactive and how you can, make that process better for your team and for your schools. And then for schools and boards, be proactive in your communications all the time, every year, throughout the year, and share that good news. And that's really the exciting part of, charter schools. There's so much good news out there, and sometimes it's the best kept secret. So how are you telling your story to your community, with your students, your parents, and then also with your authorizer?
Mary, you're preaching Stephen Covey's first habit, be proactive. It's crazy, but it works, right? And then the one thing all winners have in common is they show up, and they show up all the time, even when they don't feel like it. So thank you for that advice. We like to say chartering is a promise, not just a process, but renewal is a process. And we understand that because we're, quote, insiders. But to students, employees, families, the question of the idea that this school might not continue is a scary one. How do we frame this issue around renewal in a way that isn't just technocratic to the insiders, but if parents and others are hearing about it, how does it not spook them? How do they understand this?
Yeah, that's a great question, especially with parents, families, and the community. Is sometimes when people hear renewal, they think, "Oh, is my school in trouble?" Right? Or what's going to happen? And I think that the school having a dialogue publicly is really great. I know some schools host, events where the community can come in and the parents, and they'll talk about renewal, and they'll say, "Hey, this is what the process is. This is a normal process, but let's tell you about how all the great things that we've done." And I think it's a really good way and a good time to share their story. So we see, some schools in social media or newsletters, presentations at their board really share about the process, but also a story tell about their journey. And I think sharing those great stories, whether it's a student, I just was with a school and a board yesterday, and it was so great to hear them celebrating how far they've come and what they're doing, and their students, the great things their students are happening. It was like, hey, we have these, what they call $1 million babies, right? Where these students are getting $1 million scholarships. And it's pretty amazing to hear that. And I think sharing that story often is really important, and how they're fulfilling their mission is great. And then the authorizer, I think they can support this by being transparent about how their decisions are made, what the standards are that they're using to make these decisions, and to help families and community members understand the process. And so renewal doesn't seem like a mystery. And so we see a lot of authorizers put things on their websites about the renewal process, and I really support that. So if anybody comes to their site, they can say, "What's this renewal thing?" And they can see really clearly what that looks like. And so I think both from the school perspective and with the authorizer, being very transparent, explaining what it is, and also, consistently telling your story, I think is really important.
One of the best renewal hearings I ever attended started with like a second grader reading a poem about what their school meant to them. So that example, right, and that child was not voluntold to do it. They were also really proud to be there. That reminded everybody in the room why we do this work, and really also what's at stake. So the facts and the figures and the trends and the data and all of those things matter, but also the stories that students and families bring to the table bring all of those numbers to life. So when a parent is sharing how their child learned to read or overcame difficulties, or when a student in a high school talks about, in this environment, I finally felt safe for the first time, that adds a really real life component to the data that authorizers shouldn't ignore.
I'll say, Heather, I want to add something is when, the renewal decisions go to the board of the authorizer. Okay. Like my team as the authorizing team would recommend renewal and terms and things like that. But the decision is held at that authorizer board level. And so what made my job easier, and I love to see, and I just love to hear it as well, is it's great when school leaders come to the board to present and share their stories, but it's even better when parents and students and community members are there. And they're telling the story of the school and the great things that are happening. So I really just want to piggyback on that, the parent and student voice are so important in this process for so many reasons. And that's just another one, is whether it's at renewal time or all throughout the years, having students and parents tell that story is really impactful.
Mary, that's so powerful because they are the story, right? There's data and there's documents and bodies of evidence, but the students and the parents are the story. And to hear directly from them is so powerful when you're in that role as an authorizer and you're trying to make a good decision, right? In essence, there's a whole lot that goes into it, but is this school good for kids? Should it continue to be? And just want to thank you too for bringing so much clarity and expertise to this.
I agree. I've been kind of sitting back just a little bit more than normal, taking in this opportunity to really sit, Mary and Heather, at your feet, if you will, like my grandmother would say, and really take in some of these reflections. The depth and the clarity that both of you have brought to what seems like just kind of a little bit of a technocratic process, but how it can really come to life has been really inspirational. And there have been many, many takeaways that I've had. I think just to kind of get ready to close us out, one thing that you both made really beautifully clear is that renewal isn't just a checkpoint. It is a check-in on that promise that schools and boards have made when they submitted that application and they got that legal agreement to operate a school. And it's checking in on how are we honoring the commitment that we made to our students and our families and our teachers? And how do we decide if the school is still the right vehicle to deliver on that promise? Because when done right, and like right is a very like subjective word here, but when done in a way that really represents that particular school, renewal can be very much less like a courtroom and more like a compass. You all used that analogy earlier about a road trip. And so it's that compass to guide us to make sure that we're headed in the direction that we set out to be at, so that schools, boards, and authorizers navigate forward, row together, and not just evaluate the past. And I love how we kind of wraps here at the end when we talk about the rhythm of the relationship. And so it's not a one-time snap judgment. It's not that one day to get the yearbook photo right, but it is that ongoing story. How have we grown? How have we partnered? What has been going on with our students? How have they succeeded? And when challenges came, because they will, this is real life. When challenges arise, how do we deal with that? So listeners, stay with us. Next time we have a very powerful conversation about a really tough topic, but one that happens sometimes. And it's about closure, but with compassion. So what happens when a school can't continue? And how do we ensure that students and communities are supported in that? Jim, do you have a challenge for us today?
Oh, three of them. Number one, step back and assess your game plan. Does your renewal process reflect not just compliance, but care? Not just rigor, but relevance? What's one move you could make to ensure it reflects your values and your vision? Two, pass this episode to someone in the arena. Maybe it's a school leader feeling the pressure or a board member trying to make sense of it all. This conversation could be the playbook they didn't know they need. And three, join us in the Charter Network. Renewal is too important to do alone. Let's learn together, let's challenge each other, and let's rewrite what's possible for students, for schools, and for this movement we all believe in.
So if you haven't already, hit subscribe, follow us, make a commitment to us. We're here to support. Leave us a review. And meet us back here next time on the Bold by Choice podcast, where leadership, innovation, and impact come to life.